Welcome to the Moon Baby Magic Podcast, a space to honor women's rites of passage stories. From menarche to menopause, the initiations of womanhood all live within our wombs. We are here to reclaim the sacredness of all of them. I'm your host, Natalie Elliott, birth keeper and women's coach specializing in womb wellness and hormonal healing. Ready for slow and sacred storytelling? Let's dive in. Hey women, welcome back to this week's episode of the Moon Baby Magic Podcast. As always, thank you from the bottom of my heart for being here and taking time to slow down, to listen to another woman's medicine story, and to take care of yourself and inspire yourself by receiving the specific magic that this woman has to offer. In today's episode, Meghan and I get really into archetypes and myths as it relates to her personal story. And so, because of that, I have a special sponsor for today's podcast. And yes, again, that sponsor is me. And specifically, that sponsor today is the Womb Cycle playlists. So, this is my free offering to all of you. And these playlists are designed to support you in honing in and embodying more deeply the four archetypes that you get the opportunity to embody in each phase of your menstrual cycle. So these archetypes are the maiden, the mother, the sorceress, and the crone. Now, of course, we move through these archetypes throughout our lifetimes as well, as you hear the women in these stories share. But we also get the opportunity to move through these archetypes in 1 month as we cycle. Making playlists has always been a love language for me. I, in a past life, was a yoga teacher, and in my yoga classes was always spending more time really creating the playlists than the sequence. The sequence, those came quite easily to me, but the playlists I was always really intentional about because of how much music can shift your experience and really create a container for an experience. And I'd often get requests for my playlists, a little line of people after class to get the Spotify link. And even before that, when I was in high school, I went through quite a indie hipster phase, as one might call it, and spent like half of my sophomore and junior year, one of those making mix CDs for people. So it truly has been something I love to offer. And these four playlists are specifically curated to each inner archetype so that you can feel more connected to and embody that woman within yourself in that specific phase of the cycle. If you have more questions about what phase of the cycle is what, you can go back and listen to my Your Inner Seasons Explained episode on this podcast. And of course, you can find all the links in the show notes. All right, so getting into our episode today. On the podcast, we have Meghan Persephone Taylor. Meghan is a textile artist and specifically a weaver. So you will hear this in the way that she weaves the threads of her story together into truly a tapestry of art. As a mother of two who actually hasn't bled since becoming a mother, Meghan shares the stories of her 2.5-year conscious conception of her first, her subconscious conception of her second, where she didn't realize she was pregnant until she started showing at about 4 months, and all the creative projects that were birthed in between. Meghan's story is a mythic one of going to the underworld to transmute trauma into art and following the spiral threads of her life with deep trust. Let's dive in. Okay, Meghan, welcome to the Moon Baby Magic Podcast. I'm so happy you're here.
Hi, Natalie. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Yeah, it's really great. I'm excited, like I said before recording, just to get to know you and your story better through this podcast. I've so enjoyed seeing what you share online and just the creative force and storytelling that comes through via your online presence. So I think this is going to be a real treat.
Thank you so much. That's so nice to hear.
So, the first question I always ask everyone is to just share two things. One is the phase of life you're in. So, whether that's the maiden, the mother, the sorceress, the crone, and then also what phase of your cycle you're in, which kind of corresponds to those archetypes too, although some people think of it as seasons as well.
Cool. Yes. I am currently deep in my mothering season. I have two little daughters, a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old. It was just my second daughter's first birthday last week.
Wow.
Um, yeah, and it's full on. It's like been such a wild ride. I had my first daughter in 2021, and my conscious conception journey was like 2.5 years prior to that. So it really feels like from that like second that started, it's just been like a full speed ahead, and I'm just like hanging on for dear life in a great way, in a very like conscious way, and like yeah, like I look back to my life that like there's just such a clear, like from the conscious conception, really, a clear delineation of, yeah, when my maidenhood was like just like all of a sudden like disintegrating before my eyes. And and I didn't have a long, well, yeah, the conscious conception was long and like drawn out, but I didn't really have that type of awareness of like what that process is. Like I'm sure you hear all the time, like there's no actually like cultural markers of like what was going on. So I was just doing it, like making it all up as I go. And like, I think, yeah, just looking back in this moment, it was definitely like all of a sudden I was like being like exalted into motherhood. And
Wow.
now I'm here and deep in it and loving it. And it's totally like, it's the initiation I've always wanted. And um, yeah.
That's
Uh,
amazing.
in terms of the cycle, I was excited to share this with you because I wonder if you've ever had a guest with this. I have not had a cycle since May 2020.
Yeah.
So
Wow. Pre 2020.
yeah, that feels like yeah, I was literally like my maidenhood is over. Like in my mothering experience, I have never bled, and it's
Wow.
such an interesting season of life. Like such
Yeah.
a, I feel the deepest in my womanhood that I've ever been, and also like strangely outside of what other women are talking about, you know? Like I just don't actually even relate as much to the cycle, but there's totally like what I was really excited to get into with you is like how the cycle is innate. And so like how I've been reconnecting with the cycle even despite the not bleeding. And yeah,
Wow.
you know, if people are following along, like my second daughter really was a little surprise, and I have no idea, like, yeah, I wasn't following along because I wasn't used to it, and I don't have experience tracking anyway. Like, I wasn't. I was tracking month by month on my conscious conception journey, but like not in a like fertility awareness way, just in a like, oh my God, it's been a month. Oh my God, it's been a month. Like,
Wow, so it sounds like a really magical story of the conception of your second, and perhaps it was a situation like where you ovulated and just on that ovulation you got pregnant because most women do ovulate. Of course, ovulate before they bleed. Every woman will ovulate before they bleed, and so yeah. Wow. And so you've been really in this like full, my teacher, Nancy Lucina, who you might know, she calls this like mother season of life as just like full spinning plates. And it's just like you've got your full plates, you're in it, like just fully in that, in the archetype of the season with the mother is the summer, the like fullness. And it just sounds like you're fully embodying that right now.
yeah, truly. Like actually literally in like a fullness that I'm not even releasing. Like full, like and not even in like the usual cyclical release, which is
Yeah.
very interesting. It's been very interesting for me to just like be, and I'm super fine with it. Like I'm super like I think what I wanted to share about that, because I've been sharing it with women in my life, you know, being like, is it, you know, like is this kind of weird or like, and especially with the second baby, like because it was so surprised. I call her my subconscious conception. So like I had a very conscious conception. And then
That's
I
good.
subconscious because she was so part of this entire unfolding. Like I was so all in. Like I've been all in on this mothering initiation and like where it's leading me since the
Mhm.
get-go. since the conscious conception. So I feel like I've been like a huge wide open yes to the universe. And so it was just like, okay, well, we're not like for this next part, you can't be aware of what's going on at all because you would freak out. Like like you serious and because that is true. Like in the facts of my life at that time, I was in a very dark time, like in a literal way. I was living in my partner's parents' basement. We had no idea of what was going to be happening. We had no money and no jobs, like just like there was no clarity. So we were in the dark trying to figure out what was going on. And so I think like the divine wisdom of my daughter was you're not going to know why this is perfect, but like this is going to be perfect and it like needs to happen in this perfect way. I didn't realize that I was pregnant until I was 4 months along, until I was actually showing. And even that, it was like divinely timed with finding out this other information in like the material world, you know, like in my conscious mind and in my like ego state. I needed this information so that this would even be a remote possibility of like saying yes to. And it just, yeah, it all kind of flowed. And in retrospect, again, like going back to put the pieces together, like it totally makes sense. Like if I was my own little spirit baby, it's exactly what I would have done. Like I would not have been like, hey, mom, like, do you know what I think is a great idea? Like I think you should get pregnant again, like right now. That would have been like a clear no. I would have been like, well, I'm not even playing with that. Because it just didn't make sense to me. It didn't make sense in my conscious mind because like how often do like our biggest dreams like make sense? Like we don't know actually how they're going to unfold or how like they're going to transpire. Like sometimes you really do have to just be like along for the ride, which was just my biggest like learning from my conscious conception. Like because that one was felt more active. It felt like I was like super like, oh wow, like this is what could be happening. Okay, yeah, I want to be like in on that and like, okay, what do I need to do? Oh, okay, this I was like doing it and I was like fully all in and whatever. But and so that's why I say subconscious, because I like energetically I was still all in of like, how do I make sense of this? Or like what's happening now? Because I thought, I don't know, like I thought this was gonna be great, but now this didn't work out and whatever. We've like ended up in this place, which is like not great at all. So like what's happening? But yeah, you know, just spirit has like a really great way of making sure everything's working out. And a lot of the time you do have to get into that like ground zero so that everything new can happen. Like
Yeah.
let all of those things that were preventing whatever things, all of this from happening. And you have that kind of like vacuum time.
Yeah. So I'm curious to hear more about this, like feeling so connected to your womanhood and then learning to be in that innate cycle even without cycling.
Yes. Okay. I love that. So essentially the path from my conscious conception journey was um 2.5 years of going from not even knowing the term conscious conception, being in art school, like not being on a trajectory towards what I thought like motherhood being my next chapter at all, like just very surprising. And all of a sudden, like my obsession. And even I wasn't even like obsessed with necessarily like, yeah, I always say this and it sounds weird. I wasn't obsessed with becoming a mother, but I was definitely obsessed with having this baby. Like there was just something so, or just like the whole concept of creating life. And so that actually kind of makes sense then, like where it went, because okay, then I like and the conscious conception is great. Like it's just it's what inspired. It's like the catalyst of my entire journey up until this point, because all of these things, just like all of the synchronicities aligned in all of these certain ways. And it was right like 2020, like March 2020, basically. Um, I was finishing art school and deciding what to do next. And yeah, then March 2020 happened, and I was kind of like, okay, well, I guess I can't travel or I can't, just all these limitations seem to be like on life. And my partner got a job on the west coast of Canada. We were on the east coast. He got a job on the west coast, and we were like, fine, like let's just move and I don't know, see what happens over there. And like lo and behold, like she was conceived the cycle that we found where she would be born in. Like we lived in an Airbnb for a month and then we found this place to live. Like we moved there without any, like we didn't know where we were going to live, and then we found the place, and then June 2020 is when I conceived, like that cycle. So it was like very like geographic, like yeah, I'm so into how like, yeah, where you are influences what you're doing, and all of the like magical energies of like, if you're really listening, you can be really led, like all of these places. So that's just to say, so then I had my wild pregnancy like in the forest of Western Canada, you know, like socially sanctioned social isolation. I was like totally fine with that. Like, just leave me alone, and I'm gonna like, yeah, have this wild pregnancy, and it was amazing.
Um,
I had kind of what I call like an attended free birth. Like, I just was orienting around free birth the entire time. That was like a huge part of the conscious conception too. It was like leading me into like all of this information that I like was going to need along my path. I was so ready for it. I was so open to it. There was like, so like there was almost no layers that I had to go through of like, oh wait, like should I go to the hospital? I was like, oh, like I can have a baby right now and I don't need anyone's help. Like that was me like from the get-go on that conscious conception. And I talk about why I think that is in my story that I've written. My conscious conception journey was the project. Like, I wrote the story as a creative project, which is where I'll get to with this whole thing, because it's like been like a multi-part initiation, including the sharing of the story. Um, but anyway, so then I rebirthed my daughter with like two friends present, basically. And then there it is. Like, I'm like, okay, I'm initiated into motherhood. Like, I did it. Like, that's when it kind of felt like the conscious conception, quote unquote, was complete at that moment, obviously. Like, it's
yeah.
over. And so then I was like, okay, well, like I'm gonna try to like share that story. Like, that was epic. Like, what just happened, basically. And from like, yeah, very early postpartum, I was so like overflowing with just like all of this creative energy, and like so specifically that intention of, I want to share my story. This was so cool. How am I gonna do that? And I share all the time. It was one of these things where writing it just never came through. Like, I would kind of sit down in like the early morning, I would get up before the baby and like, okay, like write it. Like, what just happened? Just go, like write. And it never came out in just words. It was inviting me into like, oh my gosh, like the most multidisciplinary, like layer upon layer of like actually excavating what felt like up until my life until that point. Like, the creative process of sharing that story involved going back decades into my life to be like, and that so proves to me like that the non-linear quality of life. It's like, so like just this obvious spiral of like you're just going on and on and on from these certain points. And so, yeah, I was like, my initiation part two, which actually I call my integration, like integrating my experience into motherhood, was through the creative expression of my conscious conception story. And so yeah, I kind of tried to write it. And then basically I just went back. I had been in art school for textiles. I'm like a weaver. I studied weaving at school and
Wow.
had actually been weaving baby carriers like over the course of the conscious conception. That was like, it was inspiring to me. Like, it was, I attribute it very much to, I don't know, like something about the embodied experience of weaving was also bringing up like true, like new awareness and consciousness around womanhood and motherhood, and weaving as this metaphor for everything. And it was, yeah, just like mind blowing to me. And so I ended up with all of these tapestries, and they were just like these perfect canvases basically for art. And so I used those for these collages. And once I had the collages were really putting the pieces together in like an overarching way of the themes that I felt I had explored in the whole creative process, like the creative process that I went to of creating life. I like zoomed out and I kind of like, and they just came through in like a very amazing, fun way. Like, when you get into a creative flow type way, they would just like come up one by one as like, ooh, this could be, this is like, this is the first part, this is the seed of life, and then it goes into this, and then it goes into this. And it was like, so like so many things were happening, and like I was connecting with like herbalism and herbal allies, and so those were like becoming super present. um and so, yeah, I had this whole creative process that wasn't writing first. And then I ended up with 9 tapestries that were little collages that told this story in like, yeah, a conceptual way. And that allowed me to zoom in and then write my actual story, like the factual timeline story, in like section, in like the chapters of each art piece, is basically how I did it. And it was really a process of that exact thing. Like, figuring out what boxes I needed to like help myself like channel this creativity into it to like make sense of it for myself. And that process also took years. Like that was also just like not like, oh, okay, like just a like offhand thing I was gonna do. Like that whole thing then like took over my life. Like I've basically been mothering and making art for these past like, yeah, I guess it's only been 4 years, but still like that, those are the two things that my life revolves around fully. I finished what like the project became, what a conception became, which is like a Substack, a multimedia memoir on Substack in August 2023 when my second daughter was born. Like my daughter was born at the end of August 2023, and that's when the very last chapter was released because I ended up starting to release it chapter by chapter. Again, smallest, like I basically condensed it into like the smallest box I could possibly do to just every week be like, okay, I have to just write this chapter. Okay, now I just have to write this chapter, and it would just like go, and like that's how I ended up completing it. Because yeah, there's something to be said about like starting creative projects, but like actually getting to the end and like yeah, from start to finish was like, oh my God, like crazy integration process and like discipline and like all the things. And so that whole experience basically became the catalyst for what I do now, which is talk about how mind-blowing that whole thing was to me. Not only the conscious conception, but the actual creative process afterward, which of course like is a mirror of itself. And
Mm.
that's yeah, now what I talk about. Not to mention with the like the root of it being women telling our stories, like finding ways to actually express our stories in creative ways is now all I want to do and talk about it.
Wow. I mean, it's so magical just to think about this timeline that this is your project and that it's like it's almost, this idea too that you haven't gotten a cycle since 2020. It's like you were pregnant with your daughter, and then in between the two pregnancies, you were pregnant with this project.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. It feels like that. Like it feels like I've been so in creation that there hasn't, yeah, like I have been pregnant the entire time. My body has been in, you are using this, using this, using this creative energy all the time. There's nothing left to be released. You don't need to go through that like physical process apparently because you're just doing it or you're just in it or you're, yeah, energetically, that's just what I do. And that is true. Like that's absolutely true. Like it doesn't feel like a weird story that I've made up to like make an excuse for because I'm like the healthiest I've ever been. I like all of that to me just like lands as like okay, cool. Like this is like wow, like what an interesting like yeah, physical embodiment of my experience right now.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And I mean, it's totally like there's such a range of when women, start cycling again in postpartum. And like, I don't think a year is crazy. And it also totally makes sense with like what you've been experiencing. And I know you shared like this season of motherhood. It feels really good. It feels so good to be full. And it sounds like, there's just a lot of expansion that comes along with that. So I'm curious, like, to just share more about how that's felt to be in this expansion for like almost, gosh, like almost four, what is that, almost 4 or 5 years now?
Yeah, I think it's four. My oldest daughter is 3. And so like yeah, her plus her pregnancy, but then plus the conscious conception. Like I guess I do count that. So yeah, I guess that would be close to 5. Um it yeah, it's felt like I shared at the beginning, like it in a certain way I'm the conscious creator of like everything that I'm doing. But also I'm like like hanging on for dear life. Like I there are things that happen like big leaps where I'm the one being like, yeah, I'm doing that. Okay, good. Like active choice to do that. And then like I land and then I feel like, oh my God, like is this are you serious? Like is this what I'm supposed to do now? Like yeah, I live in Costa Rica now. Like when I realized that I was pregnant for the second time and we were in the basement, my partner had all of a sudden magically got a work from anywhere job and we were like, oh, okay, so I guess actually we can go anywhere now. So that was like a choice point. And in 1 week, I had already decided, quote unquote, that we were going to go to Costa Rica, that it was going to be in this specific Airbnb, and that was happening. Like, and so even that, like, to look back on that, it wasn't like I was in this whole like research mode. Like, no, like I don't do, like that type of research. I like yeah, I just like call in what I need. And so in that sense, I just really feel like I'm in this like intuitive process of following something so beyond myself, like truly so beyond myself. And that's also why I like the language of creativity, because creativity to me is, it's a force that's so specifically us. It's so specifically
Mhm.
us in our lives, and the thing that is beyond. Like we don't understand necessarily life other than the fact that like we are life and we are living, like it's a perfect kind of, I guess it's a paradox, but just like that back and forth of being who you are, and also realizing that that's just life itself, like moving through you. And yeah, so I feel like it's that. The expansion is feeling like I need to be so so grounded in so many ways, or so like when
Mm.
the thing comes through to be like, this is what is important now, this is what you must do, I have to do it, like, or else all of it, like the spinning plates, like you said, like
Yeah.
it is this balancing act that is so specific to right now, not in a delicate way, in like a, this is what is important now, like this is what must be tended to now in this season for this chapter of the journey. And so now we've been in Costa Rica ever since she was born here. We found a magical house. Like we didn't think that we were going to be like, yeah, kind of like rooting down. And we're not necessarily rooting, but we do now have once again this kind of like nest situation to like, okay, raise this baby for like another year. We have kind of these like pockets of time that we keep landing in. And in that time, I feel like it's very clear to me what I need to focus on. And like I said, it's been mothering and like surviving motherhood in the 21st century, 2024, and working on my creative process, my own creative practice, to the point of like expressing everything that I need to and creating everything that I need to with every single resource and every single like yeah, with everything that's available to me, including time and space and like emotional energy. Um and I love that. Like I'm living for that, and I'm feeling like I'm getting so close to something that is true. Like there's something so
Mm.
true about your creative energy is so distinct. Like it is the divine creative force, and it's so specifically yours. And so I'm so curious about this whole idea of like so many more women reconnecting with that, like that level of their creative power, to be like what are you gonna do, and like what are we gonna do together when we're all feeling that and we're all like following. I mentioned that I'm a weaver. Like the thread imagery to me is just so clear. Like when you get right down to it, like there's something so distinct about your thread that you get to like travel as you weave the tapestry with everyone else. And the clearer that you get on it, the like more like quote unquote yourself you feel. Like that's kind of weird language to me, because of that whole like, does that mean we're separate from capital L life? No, it actually means like you're getting even closer to being like your perfect piece of the whole everything that's happening.
Wow. Yeah, so much to just share on what you said. There's so many, I'll use your own sort of imagery, so many threads to pull there. I love that you're a weaver, and that comes through so beautifully in your storytelling of, weaving stories. And that's really how I like to say it on this podcast, is like we're weaving your story together. And the way in which you've done that is so beautiful and intentional, but also with so much trust. And a lot of what you were saying really reminded me of this sort of like maiden to mother continuum, where, and you said I wasn't researching, I was just like, basically you were magnetizing. And, like in the maiden phase of life, that's about figuring it out and researching and getting all the details and looking for the information and seeking sort of this outside validation. And then moving into the mothering phase of life, it's about becoming magnetic. And like you said, allowing that space to feel what comes next and trust that next step. And gosh, there was something else you said too that reminded me of that made into Mother Continuum. Oh, just you being of service now. It's like after your first was born, there was this sense of like needing to write your story. And then the space you're in now that you said where you're just trying to like bring women in to weave their own stories. And that's such a service to the world. It's amazing.
Yes, I love that. Yeah, so well articulated, so well reflected, because I think that's where the power lies. It's like this idea of getting so clear, integrating so well our experience. And like I said, my process was very deep, like an
Mhm.
underworld journey, really. I like reclaimed the name Persephone because that was a huge part of the journey for me. Like she is
Mm.
my, yeah, the goddess that I like relate to, and like I feel like I worked with her in a certain way. Like I went into the underworld to like make sense of my own story, reclaim these like archetypes of um Persephone's story, like which is going into the underworld to reclaim your own light, to like become aware. Like there's a whole consciousness piece. You can only be aware of your own light if it's in the darkness, because otherwise you're just in the world of
Mhm.
light and everyone else's light is just like, it's just like part of all the light. You can't maybe like
Mm.
make sense of it in a sense. Um, Whereas if you're in the dark, like your light is all there is. And so then you can see it really clear and be like, oh wow, I guess like this is mine, like to offer or whatever. So that was like a whole process and a whole healing journey. And it was all entwined with birth. Like birth is where all of this like came from for me. Like that was the
Mm.
path for sure. The conscious conception led me into like, yeah, sovereign birth, free birth, all like the birth world, the most radical parts of the birth world that you could get to is like where I'm at. Um, that's like the source of all things. So like, yeah, I was just like getting into the source. Like I was just so interested in the source. Like, what's the source of this and what's the source of this, including pain and, like dis-ease and all these things that were also there below the surface that were ready and waiting for me to like come to and be like, oh my God, like what do I do with this? And like make sense of it and then transmute it back into meaning and like healing. Like that to me is the definition of healing. Like there is something that has happened that is over here in your like awareness and in your experience in like whatever way it's held, and then you have a more conscious opportunity to make sense of it for yourself and move on because now you understand it in a new way. And I guess you're going to make sure that it never happens again. I've heard of that for something, and
Mhm.
maybe that's GNM healing, a German new medicine framework of you can resolve the conflict when you feel it's not going to happen, or it's like specifically never
Right.
happening again. Like I'm not in this conflict because I'm literally not in the conflict anymore. So if you have these unconscious conflicts, sometimes you don't realize that you're in the conflict anymore. So to me, and I love talking about that. I don't know if you have any specific questions about that process for me, but it was so specifically in the expression, like the physical, like the tangible expression of the project, where I was making sense of things such as my own birth story, like when I was born, and comparing it to my when I gave birth and blah blah blah. And that's all wrapped into the story, and that's why I call it like a what do I call it? Yeah, multi-dimensional memoir, because I feel like I like cross time and space and like brought things over and put things to rest. Like it was, yeah, just a whole thing.
I would love to hear more about some of those crossovers specifically. I'm interested if you're willing to share more about like your own birth versus the birth of your child's.
Oh, sure. Well, it's so interesting. Like I had probably like one of the most quote unquote normal industrial births that you can have. Like
Mm.
my mom's like telling of the story to me, the most normal in the sense of like common, not necessarily normal. So the most common
Yeah.
story of there was no question in her mind that she was going to the hospital. There was no other option for her, literally in her consciousness. When she got to the hospital, it was horrible because birth is horrible. And full of suffering and pain. And when the nurses and doctors told her to do something, she did it because that's what you have to do because they are helping her. And that was amazing and great. And she loved the nurses and she loved the doctor, and it was no problem. I had
Mm,
a girl because that's what you do. Like, why would you want to suffer more? And had like, I think probably one of like her own spiritual experiences of this, because it's part of what she's told me in the story. It's one of like the details that she's honed in on, where she remembers looking after the epidural, she remembers looking at the monitor and being able to see when she was having a contraction, but because she couldn't feel anything, it was like so peaceful and like nice. And she
mm,
was like having a nice experience of being like, oh wow, like something's happening, but I don't need to feel it. Like my baby's being born, but I don't need to feel it.
wow.
So I had like, yeah, all these details shared with me. And again, like my mom's perspective is so good. Like she has no qualms whatsoever about her birth. Like she has no regrets and no like, yeah, I won't say like no trauma necessarily,
Mm,
but she's not carrying it. So like that's the thing. So the process for me was having to first make sense of that. First make sense of, if this story was so good, like why does it feel so weird to me? Like what
mm,
about, like there's a discrepancy there, because there's one thing about getting a story from your mother of a terrible birth where you carry it and you're like, that was horrible and that shouldn't have happened. Like there's something like you can rage against. But for me it was like more this subtle like, wait, like, but that sounds really weird. Like, why was that okay? So I think I went back. One key part of the process was my dad really liked tape film. He was constantly like video recording things. And so there's like footage of my birth.
wow.
I saw it like at these like quintessential times in my life, I guess. Like I'm sure I saw it like throughout my life. I'm pretty sure like my parents would play it. Like it was like a thing. Because again, there's no like regrets here. This is just like birth. Like look at this. Like this is crazy. um and the footage to me, okay, so I think I saw it throughout my life. I don't like specifically like necessarily remember how like what I thought about it necessarily. But then I also saw it like deep in the conscious conception portal where I was like,
Mm,
I'm gonna have a baby now. I'm not gonna have a birth in the hospital. Wait, why am I not gonna have a birth in the hospital again? I saw it again. Like I went home for Christmas and like I went and like found the disc and like because now my mom's like made the tapes into discs. Like it's actually like it's all been very accessible to me to find this information. I was playing it. I remember just like in the dark one night, like, and I watched my birth again. It's the most traumatizing thing I've ever seen. Like it's
wow.
viscerally horrible in all the ways that I don't know, people who like look and see industrial birth for what it is, of disconnection and men in the room and like doing things like a lot of weird shit. And I think it's not the birth. Like you don't see me being born per se. Like I'm like the birth process is happening and the doctors are there and the blah blah blah. It's afterward actually that I found the most disturbing, which is cutting the cord immediately, being put on a metal table, being like swabbed and scrubbed and like all these things, like just newborn baby me going through the experience, my dad filming it. Like, let's remember, like the whole, yeah, just like the trippiest, one of the trippiest moments of my life, but so obvious and so clear. And apparently, like a really helpful part of my process to be like, oh shit, like that's what happened. Like it wasn't even a story at that point. It just was right there in front of me. And so that was like, I guess a catalyst for all this, or like a knowing. Like I was like, oh my God, like, okay, that's why this was all so horrible. And that's why I feel horrible. And okay, now I have these pieces to work with. Okay, I'm gonna dive into why the fuck was that guy there? I'm gonna dive into what does it feel like to be separated from my mom immediately? I'm gonna work with the epidural. Like I was
Mm,
dumb. Like my mom didn't feel anything, so I don't feel anything when birth is happening. Something like this. Like there's a lot of details that I just went back to like see, like, oh, this is my story. Does that like does that correlate to like what I'm experiencing now? Yes, yes, yes. Of course it does. That is the story.
Mm,
Like that is the pattern. And so it's just what I had to work with to make sense of, yeah, what I had gone through and make it and transmute it. So that's where the like healing to me
mm,
happens. Like, what am I going to do with this then? Like, am I going to be outraged and like tell my mom that this was horrible? Like all these kind of, there are options then. And that's where the consciousness comes in too, of now who I am now. How do I make sense of this? And how do I move through this in a way to get to a place where I'm not carrying the trauma of that anymore? Like, and that was my process. And so I was writing, I was like using the footage in a certain way. Like I have clips of the footage, and like poetry was really the mode for that one. I would
mm.
like write, I would try to write the story again, and because like it, like sentences are like of no use to me in that way, like I would just kind of like like just words to put it together. And kind of, I think that also helped me to zoom out and actually not participate in the experience as viscerally as I had been as a child. Like I felt like I got to have agency over writing the story now, and so I actually do it in like a third person way. I don't say I
Mm,
am experiencing this in the poem. It's like she is experiencing this. She, the blah blah blah. It's all like a she.
yeah.
And the actual story, my actual conscious conception, is in first person. It's my story. So that's just like, and again, that's just like, oh, where I live in how can our forms of creative self-expression like perfectly tell our stories. Like again, like it wasn't writing for me, but then it was. Like ultimately it was. Like I'm not actually obviously gonna like write the story, but I needed all of these little pieces to hold the intensity and like the actual like what it was, and adequately like make sense of it for me, but then like express it for the world um in the way that I needed to.
Yeah. I mean, it makes so much sense to me because, it's like we have to metabolize our own stories and, like you said, make sense of it for yourself before like it's going to be something that we can share. There is even that aspect like nervous system healing is like we have to feel safe and secure in our story. And like you said, you had to go back and sort of work with these different pieces and then write it in the sense that, write it in poetry first, in the sense that this is happening sort of not to someone else, but like to let go. It sounds like to let go of that part of your story a little bit. And then this conscious conception story, writing it in the first person, it's almost seems to me like a repatterning. Did it feel like that to you?
Oh, completely. Like a repatterning in like a reclaiming of true patterning. Like if
Mm,
I felt viscerally bothered by all of these things that happened, okay, well, how can I do it like just specifically opposite and like see what happens, you know? Like even that feels like that kind of reconnecting to something. Maybe I can't even describe it because it's just so obvious. It's just like what can happen if there's no fear and there's no coercion and whatever all the factors that we think have led to industrial birth being the norm.
mm, mm. I'm curious to hear, like, you talked a bit about the underworld and Persephone, and I love that because I actually think, I don't know too much about Persephone, but I've always resonated with the goddess Inanna, and she takes a trip to the underworld too. And I think as women, like you mentioned, going to the underworld, you can see your own light. It's not like you're just seeing all the light and don't know which one is yours. It's like very clear who you are there. And that's been my experience too. Like anytime I felt like I've gone to the underworld, it's like, wow, I'm really seeing myself. So I'd love to hear more about that experience and to just kind of for you to orient me to where in your story this was happening.
Totally. So specifically, Persephone helped me through the creative process. So I actually found a mentor-ish. I found a writing course because I was very interested in this idea of memoir. Like I was like, oh, okay, I guess what I'm trying to do is write a memoir because a memoir is defined as a period of time. You're going to write a period of time from your life as opposed to like, for example, an autobiography is like your entire life. And obviously who's writing an autobiography at 25. Like, so I was like, okay, I guess what I'm trying to do is write like a little memoir. So like, how do I do that? Like, cause I haven't really been like a writer per se. Like I've always used words when words are necessary, but like I'm a weaver and I'm like I don't know, yeah, like a conceptual artist. So I was kind of digging into trying to make sense because it felt kind of hard. Like I said, when I was sitting down to try to
Mhm.
write it, it wasn't really coming through. And I was like, okay, I'm going to like learn this then. And so I, called in a very cool course, specifically about memoir writing. It was called The Art of Personal Myth Making, and the woman who runs it is Janelle Hardy.
Wow.
Um, and her whole thing is basically something that is so powerful to do is to find a myth, story, archetypal like unfolding that resonates with you to support you in writing out your own memoir, like your own story, of making sense of your story in reference to other stories. And the way that you do that is essentially identifying which story you've always loved, and you probably have it. Like it's one of those things of like all you need to do is like sit for 1 minute and be like, oh, what story do I love? And like something comes and that's probably the thing. For me, it
Mm.
was this Persephone and Demeter story that was in like one of those compilations of random fairy tales, super like weird retelling. Like I don't super remember what it was necessarily, but it came to mind like right away. Like Persephone was right there for me, and I was like, oh, okay, cool. Like cool. I'm gonna like go through this course now. The first step was outline what happens in the myth, and now outline what happens in your story. Are there any like key things that you can be like, oh, okay, like here's a similarity and here's a theme and here's a blah blah blah. So first of all, Demeter and Persephone is about a mother and a daughter. So that speaks to birth to me. There was this idea of Persephone going into the underworld, kind of up for discussion whether she's kidnapped and like brought against her will into the underworld, or if she goes there on her own volition. Of course, like the telling will speak to the person's perspective on that, um,
Mm.
which I love, and I've played with that
Mhm.
spell. Like it's so, yeah, it's so good. Um, so that to me was kind of that spoke to my conscious conception journey, because I felt like I absolutely did go into the underworld on my own. Like I was so compelled to be like, hey, like what is over here? And like, wait, what's all this? And like that was very dark. Like I was just like leading myself into the underworld for sure, with all of that unknown stuff that I was like actively seeking out. And so I like, yeah, went down there. And then just this idea of like so then she's in the underworld and she's the only living thing. And so Hades in like the Greek, yeah, because yeah, Persephone is the Greek goddess, and so Hades is like the lord of the underworld, and he's in love with her because she's the only living thing. Like it's like dark and bleak down there anyway. So again, there's like the story of like, okay, is he gonna like force her to marry him, or is she gonna like actually fall in love with Hades? Blah blah blah. But like all to say, now she's in the underworld, and she recognizes that she is alive and she is this divine light. And now all she wants to do is get back up to Earth to be with her mom, Demeter, the goddess of all green things, and live again. So it's kind of like that's the perspective and the kind of learning that she does. And the story is that like it's something to do with pomegranate seeds, right? Like again, it's like she's either given and kind of like coerced into eating pomegranate seeds in the underworld, and once you eat food in the underworld you can never return. There's like something about that. Or I again have kind of like really sat with that whole idea of like nourishment, and like on her own volition she decided to take the sustenance available to her, which like so it goes like as soon as she ate the pomegranate seed, then she has claimed her place as the queen of the dead. So she was the goddess, like the maiden of spring, but now she's the queen of the dead because she's had this experience and she gets to go back. And then again in the different tellings there's all these like deals, and that's where like the masculine is a really interesting part of the story to me, because like Hades is there, Zeus is there, and Demeter is trying to make a deal with both of them to like convince them that Persephone should get to come back, because no one's supposed to come back from the underworld. That's actually like the thing, right? Like you go to the
Yeah.
underworld when you're dead and you don't come back until you're reborn. But Persephone is this exception because Demeter is her mom and I'm pretty sure Zeus is her dad. So there's these kind of like, she has like these very like strong masculine forces on her side, quote unquote. But then if you're saying that like she doesn't want to be with Hades, then that's like a little bit sketchy. But to me, she represents the balance of both sides, because now she has to spend 6 months in the underworld and 6 months on Earth, and she actively goes between both, and she actively understands the circumstances of both. Like, she knows the difference. She knows the difference between life on Earth and being the only living thing, the queen of the dead in the underworld. And that to me is like the whole thing. It's not even going to be about ever avoiding the underworld journey again. It's going to be able to be so conscious and take exactly what's needed from the underworld to bring it back to life every single time.
Hmm. Such a beautiful telling of that story. And yeah, I mean, I think it's been a long time since I've heard that story. I wonder maybe if it was even when I was in like fourth grade and we were learning about Greek gods and goddesses, and that's when I heard it. And so to hear your telling of it and interpretation of it, I just think that, for the women listening, like, see if you can see yourself in this story, because I think most of us can, like, find our own kind of personal myth in that story. And I love that you took a whole course on, your own personal myth. So tell me, like, how you feel like you went into this underworld in your conception journey. And I'd just love to hear more about your 2.5 year conception journey and like what that was like for you.
True. Well, I think the underworld for me is a bit like just your own world, in a sense, like kind of having this like time where actually like you're pretty removed from like the real world. And
Mhm.
that's because again, like, it's always this idea of like, it's so easy to have these like kind of cliche metaphors, and we all maybe kind of understand what we're getting at. But like, obviously I didn't have like 2 years of my life where I like didn't come out of my room. Like, that's how it happens in this day and age. Like, maybe it used to, maybe you could like go up the mountain and go into the cave and like then you come back down. But this has to happen in the real world, in like, yeah, in the current culture that we live in. So I think what it really was for me was just finally looking a lot of things in my life in the face and being like, do I even want that? And then having to make a lot of shifts very slowly but surely. Like, it wasn't, not a lot of things were clear in terms of, oh, like, if I want to have a baby, then I have to move out of my living with roommates or anything like that. But also it was because I started that whole experience living with women, and the like the like the reflections that I got from them, and I was like close with them. It wasn't like random people. It was like friends for like many, one woman in particular. I'd like gone through many phases of life with her, and I was arriving in this place of like not understanding it for myself, right? But kind of like having this crazy thing of like, hey, like, I think I'm gonna have a baby soon. And all of it, like, are you insane? Like, not even close to like trying to hold space, or like trying to like reflect back, or like be curious with me, like, what could that possibly be? Just like horror like, and like disgust in their like reflections back to me. So that was a specific experience of feeling like I needed to remove myself from that situation. I was like, oh, like, I guess I can't really like do that here then. And I'm gonna go live by myself. So like all of that kind of just like removing myself from what my life had been in so many ways, to be like, okay, well, oh, like, who am I without that? Who am I over here, like, really focusing on this? So that to me is like the way that you can explore the underworld and still get up every day and go to your job. And like, yeah.
Yeah,
So
I mean, it sounds just sort of like your orientation is more internal than external.
yeah, I'm like a 2-4 in human design, which is a hermit, to like a hermetic opportunist.
Oh, that's so great. And so during this time of this like conscious conception journey, you're having all these internal reflections. And I'm just I'm wondering about the 2.5 years. Like, what was it all internal reflections? Like, did you have a partner? Were you finding a partner? Like, what makes you consider this all your conscious conception journey, this whole time period?
Yes. Such a good question. And so specifically, I count the moment that the conscious conception starting, the moment that I laid eyes on my partner. I met him
Oh,
like 5 days after my 21st birthday in a moment that both of us will remember forever. Like it truly like that's where I start the story. If anyone is interested in reading a conception, like this is where it will start. It's 2018 and I'm saying that I've already gone through an underworld journey that spring. Like that's the spring that I like come back out again because there's other layers. That's like other aspects of the spiral where I processed my own birth. I processed my first breakup. That was like these two huge looming things in my life were like the catalyst for all of these kind of like new moments of my life. So I start the whole like memoir idea of like finding a box, like where is it going to start? It's
hmm.
yeah, 2018 and I'm saying that I've just come back from hell again. Like maybe for the first time, who knows, like in a like conscious way because it was the longest darkest winter of my life because it was yeah, my first breakup, my first like dark night of the soul. But I've come back and I'm ready to live again supposedly. And then 5 days later, I meet the love of my life in a bar and it's on. Like from then it's it's just yeah, it's just my life is totally changed and yeah, I like fall deeply in love and our story is just ready and waiting for us. Like our baby is ready and waiting for us and she's like telling us all these things like and we we have our honeymoon phase is like so epic and fun and like I go to music festivals for the first time and like all these like next level experiences are like happening and yeah, she just I write about this like specific experience that I have where like I'm not the kind of person to necessarily have like dreams, like specific dreams of my babies or anything, but there's just these like moments where I become aware of like a presence that I make sense of in the way of, oh, I guess that's my baby. But like for the first time, like this is the trippiest thing ever. And so that moment was 4 months after we met and I was on this like camping trip with again like all of my peers. Like I was on a school trip, and like again, I just feel like the like the iffy, just like yeah, the discrepancy between like what I was experiencing and like where everyone else in my life was just started getting like so like the expanse was widening because I was like on this trip and like freaking out that all of a sudden I thought that I was pregnant that day and it made no sense.
Wow.
Of course I wasn't. Like I was like all these things but like in my awareness I was like no, like I'm pregnant now and like I'm gonna get, and if I'm not pregnant now I'm gonna get pregnant like tomorrow, like, and it's inevitable. Crazy. And it was, yeah, blowing my mind. And like no one in my life was even like anywhere close to like being able to hold space for me or like get any of that. And I didn't get it. Like I didn't get it at all. But just all to say, like that's where so slowly but surely, but also very fast, like okay, like I meet him and then 4 months later, like that happens, and then the seed is planted and I'm kind of like what, like we could, oh okay, so like obviously we could have a baby, like everyone knows that, but like are we gonna have a baby? Like I'm like
Mhm.
in school and then the blah 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 and then so and I'm still in art school, so then I go back for like I think it's my second last semester and I'm in like my weaving full time. And all of my weaving starts being about conception and babies because it's what I am thinking about, but it's also like what is like telling me. Like it's like the information from beyond of like,
Wow.
get it? Do you get it? Do you get it? Like, do you get it? And I'm like literally I'm like, I get it. Like
Oh my goodness. It's so magical. I love the way that you tell your story and just like your willingness and ability to trust all of these nudges, even when like the people around you were not really holding space or reflecting back that trust to you is really impressive.
thank you. I'm pretty much Aries. I'm Taurus, Aries, everything. And in astrology, I'm Aries everything. So I think I have like there's this certain fire of like I can't do it like the way that other people are doing it. Like I'm going to do it, and if I don't do it, like I'm gonna either be in physical pain or like very spiritual pain. Like it's just when it's
Yeah.
time to go and do the thing, like I'm doing the thing. Like when it was time to like or, yeah, when I knew I wasn't ever gonna set foot in a hospital again, I'm never gonna set foot in for a birth. I'm in the hospital. I'm never going to. That's just like not even I'm not even at all going to consider that because now I'm going to go over and like blaze the trail that I need to walk over here. Like as the first one in my family and all of these generations to do that. I just like have to do that.
Mm. Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, it's like the Aries and Taurus energy. It's like you're going to like blaze your own path and you're going to be stubborn about it. And I love that because it's such an important energy. Like we need the fire people in this world. So how is there a catalyst moment where you're like, okay, I actually am going to conceive now?
Yeah, we move. It's March 2020. It's April 2020. It's March 2020 when I'm like, oh, I was gonna go to France, and I'm like, oh, I guess I can't go to France, and okay, we'll move to like BC, and then we like road trip, and that's super fun. And I'm literally like, okay, I'm pregnant now. Like just I'm always like for the last few months, or like for like a year, like maybe 12 months every month. I'm like, it's now, like it's happening now. And what does that mean now? And every month, like, no, like every month it's like, no, like this lesson. Like, and then every month I would have like, oh, thank God it's not now. Like, oh my God, I'm get to deal with. Like, there's just like it. So that's how it was. I feel like that's what can answer your question the best is like, yeah, 2.5 years happened because in that place that I was in when I met my partner for the first time is like not the circumstance that like anything was gonna be able to like happen. Like or it was like in a divine way, like thank God I was like 2.5 years out from like getting my shit together and like yeah, being like saying yes in like a full way. So yeah, like I said, like we road tripped in like peak COVID and then lived in an Airbnb while we kind of like tried to find a place to live and then found it. And then the cycle that we found it, I conceived.
Wow. Such an
Yeah.
incredible story. Yeah, like you found your groundedness, you found the support on the outside that you needed and yeah.
Yeah, like my literal little Taurus hermit cave. Like I go from the journey, like it's gonna be like bold and like the like fire journey, but then it's time to nest. And then it's time to hold it down in a yeah, in a very mother way. Like, and that's where I'm at again. This is exactly almost like, oh, I've never even seen it like so clearly for myself. But like that's what we did again. Then we decided to move to Costa Rica. No, I have no idea about Costa Rica. Like I know nothing about Costa Rica. I never like traveled like this far. And yep, we were just gonna move there. We're gonna live in an Airbnb. Who lives in an Airbnb? 6 months. But I just like found, yeah, whatever. So that again, and now we're in like a very like nested home base, which I love. And then like it's already been like 6 months, and I'm kind of like, where am I gonna go next? Because I'm going crazy. Like, yeah, so it's obviously a very big, yeah, it's like this fire to earth cycle. And I think maybe that's why again it all comes back to creativity for me because that's such a like force that's like a fiery force. I like resonate with like fire imagery and like tending to the creative fire, like all of that. But there's also this aspect of like it's going to be just this discipline of showing up every single day and seeing what happens in like a really like grounded robust way.
Mhm. I love that. I love that you said cycles of fire and then earth. That's exactly the way to put it. It's like moving, uprooting, changing in the way that feels resonant for you, and then rooting into that change. And then there's like the little kindling of a new change and being in that. And then it's beautiful.
Yeah.
I'm curious too. So the conception of your first was this long, intentional process. And with your second, you call it an unconscious conception. And I remember hearing a little bit about your story of living in like your partner's parents' basement. And yeah, tell me about that unconscious conception journey a little bit.
Totally. I mean, I do call it the subconscious
Oh,
conception.
sorry. Yes, subconscious.
Yeah, so it was, so that one, yeah, very interesting. So after my kind of 2 years on the West Coast was up, like I felt the call again to like, yeah, no, this is, and it was like, it was also kind of a basement apartment type thing. It was like way too small to actually live in. It was like time to leave. After 2 years, my daughter was one. And we decided to move back to the other side of Canada, back to the East Coast. And it's just, I'm definitely not going to get into that story because it's like way too elaborate. But essentially, we had this kind of idea of there was a community there for us to live in. And my partner and I are just like, so, like, that is our dream. And we have this very kind of like, very far reaching vision of community and what that's going to mean and why it's so important. So we're always like very tempted into these like, oh, community, cool, great, let's go live in community, we need help right now.
Mhm.
And so we just like took the leap again, like back there. And it's like I feel like we probably both knew that we had like a certain amount of safety net, but like definitely weren't going to acknowledge that because Sean's from there and he's like his parents are there and the blah blah blah. But essentially we like tried to live in this community. It was not even close to being a circumstance that was going to like allow us to survive more than like the 3 months of the summer.
Oh
And
no.
not it was not good. And so then we ended up with a truck, like our truck full of everything that we owned and nowhere to live. Like just yeah, and the housing, like all the things, like of course, like everyone I don't know. There's nowhere to live. Like even if we had money, there wasn't even anywhere to live in Nova Scotia-ish. So we yeah, just kind of like conceded and Sean's parents have space in the basement and Sean's mom is amazing and like just yeah, like they took us in. Like we just didn't really have anywhere else to go. And so they took us in and that was a huge oh god, like a whole other underworld experience. Like just like once again I had to be like sitting with myself and I guess that idea of like all the choices that I had made up to that point, but it definitely didn't feel like I had made wrong choices. That's the other thing. Like it felt like, yep, like I couldn't stay where I was, and then I tried this thing and that didn't work out, and that just is what it is. And so now I'm here, and now I have to figure this out. And so once again, it was kind of just an opportunity for me to be. All I had to do was keep my kid alive and work on my creative practice. That's all I had. It was winter it was winter in like the small town outside of a small town in Nova Scotia, Canada. Like there was nothing else happening. Like it's almost like I absolutely call in these situations to like initiate myself. Like this is my
Yeah.
case. Like you want to try and find me? Like yeah, no one can even like find me here, which is, sad. It's like depressing and sad and like all of the emotional things. But I was pretty clear already on like I was still in the midst of writing my project. Like I was still doing that. So I was like, yeah, I do need time to do this. So fine, whatever. Like I'll just
Yeah.
write it. Like and then again, it's like, okay, well, why didn't you write it already in like 1 year? Oh, right, because like there's all of these like things that's like part of it that I needed to like work through and get through. And like, yeah, just that really was like a big, huge thing. And we were there for 8 months
Mm.
until yeah, my partner got this job and then I was 4 months pregnant. I was 4 months pregnant, I think, by the time we left. But actually,
Okay.
I never knew, right? Like I say, like I have this guesstimate date, and I probably never knew because then she came way earlier than I expected. So I was probably off, which again, I'm sure is divinely timed because who gets on a plane to Costa Rica 9 months pregnant? Like I was probably closer to 9 months pregnant when I came here. Like, wait, okay, eight. Like eight because like a month later, okay, like 2 months. Okay, so 7.5 months pregnant, and I'm sure I don't know. I was doing it anyway, so I was doing it, but I always kind of like yeah tracked back for myself to be like, this isn't crazy. This is fine.
That's amazing. So you did have your second in Costa Rica. Your second birth was in Costa Rica.
Yep. And I just decided that that was happening because she told me that that's what was happening. Like I didn't have any idea really like why Costa Rica. It just again was like that's the place. Here's an Airbnb. Figure it out. And I was like, okay, great. And it definitely felt like a great new plan. Like that's something great about conscious conception, right? Like you have a pretty good, like if everything in your life is kind of chaotic, you at least have this like thing that you're going for, you know, which anything
Mm.
creative project could even be that if you're like willing to let it like, okay, I don't know what's happening, but like I'm gonna try to do this. Okay, I don't know what's happening, but I'm gonna have this baby. And so how do I want to do it? Definitely not having it in this basement. Costa Rica sounds great. And, you know, of course, like lo and behold, Costa Rica is a perfect place for us to be right now, like in lots of ways, like in like emotional, spiritual, like all of these things, but also in like a practical way. Like Costa Rica doesn't have an army. Costa Rica is a neutral place. And to me, there's
Mm.
a lot of like, yeah, there's actually kind of like a political perspective on that of like why I'm here. And you can tell like this is the culture. Like this is a culture of peace and like people just living life the way that is. Ooh, and that's a great place to actually maybe tie it all the way back into the cyclical living because like
Yeah.
beautiful about Costa Rica is it only has two seasons. It like the wet and the dry. And so I've lost that kind of North American or like whatever, northern hemisphere seasonal shift from like spring to summer to fall to winter, which you know, like I love as much as the next person of like the colors changing, like all of that. So what I feel here is it is this like call to an innate cycle. I have to be in my own cycle because the world isn't going to necessarily reflect that to me. Other than also that's its own cycle. Like I'm actually in this, like the days are just so consistent. They are like bright and sunny and beautiful in the morning. And then in the wet
Mhm.
season, it rains. And then in the dry season, it's just sunny all day long. Like it's the
Mhm.
most consistent thing that I've ever experienced. There's like not a lot of shift. So again, I get to just be in this experience of I can make a schedule and I will know that I can stick to that schedule. Like it's not going to be rained out if I planned it in the morning. It's totally like we're just like running this kind of routine, which, you know, any mother will know is like the key to doing anything and making any semblance of like order from the chaos. And so my partner and I are just doing that. Like we're just running the thing that works, you know? And of course, like there's shifts and the ebbs and the flows and the whatever, but it feels like we just get to have all this like spaciousness and like just like, yeah, I'm like feeling so grateful in this moment for the life that is like flourishing in Costa Rica because that's just what it is. Like it is just reflecting back thriving life. And if you're tapping into it, it's just like, yeah, like go for it. Like do the thing. Like be in your creative practice right now and see what happens because like we just got you. Like we just got you. Like we're just going. We're not like you're not gonna have a winter where maybe you're gonna like fall off and like something else is gonna happen. Like it's just go time.
Mm. It sounds like it's just perfectly mirroring what's happening in your internal reality with just being fully in it and fully on.
Yeah. Totally, which is so perfect. Like, I don't know if you know about or like if you've explored astrocartography, I'm getting super excited about it because I never did that again, like consciously, like, oh, okay, what astrocartography is the study of looking at what geographical places actually have resonance with the planets in your chart. So you can go find your Jupiter line and have all the energy of Jupiter like behind you in that exact location. So of course I've been like looking because I didn't look at what Costa Rica was. I didn't look at what like Nova Scotia, BC, and Costa Rica were until like a couple weeks ago. And like of course there's like specific lines over all of them. And they're like
Wow.
things. The thing in Nova Scotia was significant partnerships. Like I forget what the BC one was, but Costa Rica is my Saturn line, which doesn't sound, I don't think people are intentionally moving to Saturn lines all the time because it's about hard work, like discipline and like it's about like doing a thing. And yeah, that does feel like what I'm doing. Like, and it's heavy and like hard, like on like even on the body it's saying. And so I'm like, yeah, like I actually do kind of feel like there's just like a lot of strenuous effort happening, but that's what it is. And that's like what I kind of need to move through this chapter. Definitely on to the next. Like always with this idea of like I feel like I've been connected to this certain thread ever since the conscious conception. Like that was the invitation to be like, this is like a soup. This is like your thread of life. Like, do you want to go all the way with it? And like
Mm.
see how far it goes and all of the things that I'll be asked to do to supposedly like, yeah, come into all of my visions.
Mm. I love that you brought in the astrocartography. I just learned about that this year, and I haven't actually looked up my own chart, but I need to because it's so fascinating to see like why we're drawn to the places we're drawn to. And I also just love what you said about like this is the thread. This is where you're going. Like, do you want to follow the thread all the way? Because that is a choice. Like that is a choice point. Like, do I want to follow this thread all the way? And what a beautiful thing to say yes to in your life is to like fully own your where your life is going and what you're going to do with it.
Yeah, I have goosebumps. It's so beautiful. It so is. It's so specifically the choice. Do you want to follow it forever? Literally
Mhm.
infinitely forever. Because you can stop. You can take like a little pit stop. You can take a little you can pitch a whole civilization over there.
So tell me, if you were to share, we've been kind of weaving through different pieces of your story, and if you were to share just where you are right now, what would you say?
Well, coming out of Mercury retrograde, I'm honestly like I'm always having to come back to that exact intention. Like that sounds simple, sure, follow the thread forever, like go for it. But like it is always going to be like asking me to be super clear on things, and like I'm going to take this detour because oh, like I'm not getting it yet, or I'm not like I don't get that it's to this depth that I need to go to in order to like keep moving along whatever this thing. So I honestly feel like in these past few months I've done quite a few detours and quite a few like, oh no, like that's fine. Of course I can do it like that. Like, no, like no problem. And no, like I've actually been like shoved back and like, no, that's not gonna work that way. You can do it that way, that's totally fine, but it's not gonna do the thing that you are supposedly saying that you want to do. And so in in these past few weeks I've had much more clarity, and it's Virgo season while we're having this conversation, and I just feel like yeah, it's like hey no, like get clear again on like the details. This is gonna take a lot of like organized discipline to enact the thing in the time that it's meant to be. Um, and so yeah, I feel that, and is yeah, I just have to share it. Like what I'm working on specifically is, and what I've always seen coming out of writing the story and trying to share, like what's so cool about this whole creative process? Like what does that even mean? And like how could I share that? What I've been working on is a course about reconnecting to your red thread, quote unquote. And it's not
Mm.
like that's the metaphor that I'm going to weave through it, and it's not even going to be super overt, but it's about tapping into your creativity and seeing like can you find, it's going to be called beacon, do can you see the beacon, is it clear to you what you're going for, because that's what's always carried me. Like I am a very like visual person, and I can see what I want in the future, and then it's just about like making sense of the reality right in front of me and like trying to put all the pieces together to like get there, quote unquote. It doesn't, it's not, of course it's not a destination, but like there's something so clear to me. Like if it's a thread, I feel like I'm being pulled from like the beacon of the thread to,
Mm.
and so the course is about other like helping, supporting, walking with other women to reconnect with that, because I just think once you have that, like once you get even like a glimpse of that again, like it's on. Like women are the carriers of life. Like if we can move past all of the superfluous things in our life bogging us down from anything that we see as like the highest and best for us, but of course for our families and for our communities and for like everything beyond us, like that is the way. And so, yeah, I've been passionately like trying to figure out how to like, get through my own process again of like, am I the person who can share this? How do I do it? The blah blah blah. How do I work on the internet? Like all like the stuff. like so specifically the stuff to manifest things that like we want to see in the world. And I feel like I'm really close because I'm like so much more than halfway of like writing the course, and it's literally just about like make the course, like say that it's done and like put it out there and then do it. So that's like really exciting. And it's so what we've been saying of like what I'm doing and experiencing and learning is obviously what I'm going to have to share and have to offer from like a wisdom perspective in this like very specific way. And I just live for that kind of inquiry of what could your story, where could your story lead you in terms of what you would then have to offer. And then there you go, because I'm sure that's going to be a very reciprocal thing. Like wisdom is hard to come by these days. And it's very like, yeah, that's going to be what we need the most in like the coming years.
Yeah, it's amazing to hear that. And, it's true. Like our stories are such medicine for others. And we have no idea, like when we're going through this experience, that like what's going to come from it and how it's going to serve the world. And I love that you're following those threads. I absolutely love the imagery of the beacon and the thread kind of pulling you. And I think that's such a superpower. As women, it's like if we can vision it, which is like I think a feminine superpower. If we can vision it, like we can take the steps necessary. And it's cool to think too, you were saying I don't think most people move to a Saturn line, but it's like you're there and like you're in the nitty-gritty of like taking the steps to the vision. That's so incredible, so inspiring.
Thank you.
Yeah. So as we wrap up, I just want to ask if there's a piece of womb wisdom, which is what I call sort of just these nuggets that we all carry as women to share, that you would like to leave with the women listening. What might that be?
Beautiful question. And what just comes up right away is this idea that, yeah, not only has your experience been the most meaningful thing that's ever happened, but absolutely you are the one to transmute that into everything that it is. And by that I mean like the beauty, the medicine, the wisdom for others because you've processed it in a certain way. And storytelling and like, yeah, trusting your, it's almost like trusting yourself to tell your own story will always lead you in the right direction. Like there's been nothing wrong with your story, there's been nothing wrong with your experience, and who you are in this exact moment is exactly who you need to be to transmute that in whatever way you are meant to into something. And that's I always like to like asterisk that to be like, it's not because our stories are meant for other people. Like they are going to be first and foremost for you to make sense of and to live the life that you want to live, like storytelling is an inherently like creative reclamation because you're reclaiming the very act of the storytelling beyond the story. Now you get to be the storyteller and like you get to say what's happening next.
Such wise words and so absolutely well put. Thank you for that. It's been such an honor to have you on here to share your stories and your wisdom and your creativity. And I just love, Megan, if you would like to share where women can find you and your offerings.
Yes, thank you so much, Natalie. This has been wonderful. I love finding the right channels for, yeah, all the things to be expressed in the perfect time, because I've told these stories quite a few times now and they always come out in different ways, and this one felt really, really powerful.
Mm.
Right now, so the first step of my like, oh my gosh, like of my vision had been to host a membership for women who are interested in any of this type of what I'm saying, the creative process, creativity, interested in like calling creativity back into our lives in a significant way. I host a membership on Mighty Networks where that's just like what we're talking about. And in the end, like, or like what it's been since I like opened it in November is it's women gathering every single week with the intention of kind of checking in about what creativity means to us this week, So there's like a consistency to it. there's just like a women's reflecting each other's magic like aspect of it that's just really special place. If you feel called to any of this, or if any of this resonates with you, like it's a very special place, and it definitely feels like it's the kind of like fertile soil where the other things that I'm going to be offering will like come from. So I kind of already mentioned, but I'm going to be having a course also in the Mighty Networks, where then you can be sharing. It'll be a self-paced course, but you can be sharing along the way within the community, because I really something that has become so clear to me, and maybe this is the Taurus energy again, but this is like a long haul. Like if you're in this, it might be like a really long unfolding, and it's not just going to happen in a week. It's not even going to happen in a month. It like didn't happen for me for years, because it's like there's something to me about what I'm trying to offer and trying to inspire for others. It's like the storytelling and the making sense of it, and the like that whole transmutation process, like that is a whole process that needs to unfold. And yeah, doing it in the company of women in like a way that feels, I always say, like, what is it, like encouraged and celebrated along the path is like so significant, because otherwise, like, it does have to come from you looking out into the world. Like no one's going to be asking you to do this, no one's going to be saying like, oh wow, I'm like so impressed, you're like really devoted to your trade. Like no. And so that's where I feel like my fire has always been like part of the gift that I can like share, is like I've had this fire, I don't know why, I'm like going for this, I'm doing this, I don't know why, I'm just like doing it. And would you like to at least do it together? Because for me, it's been like a long and winding, very lonely road. And it's definitely like obviously can be exalted when women are doing it together and like learning from each other and inspiring each other. So that's the membership. It's called The Matriarch's Return. That's also my Instagram handle where you can find me. And I have like really big plans also for the membership, because I've also learned that I don't super love the like constant content creation like aspect of Instagram. Like surprisingly, like I get kind of caught up in it. I'm like, oh yeah, I'm so excited, I'm going to use like Instagram as an art platform, but it's not enough to me. Like it doesn't go into the depth, because then okay, like I've made all this content and then it's like out into like the ether, like never to be seen again. Like I actually hate that. I want something that like withstands the test of time, and like the like length to which I went to like bring you this content is like so much more than just like a one-off thing. Obviously that's so different modes for different people. I'm sure there's people who love the one-off content because it's kind of like it's over here and it's like bubbly and sparkly and like all of these things, and it's great and it can work every single week. I just like the idea of like when you're working so hard on something that's so like meaningful to you, you want something really kind of contained for it to live in, not just like these ephemeral, people are scrolling past it all of a sudden and blah blah blah. So just since opening the membership, I even see how even deeper I want to go in like cultivating a space where women feel they can go into the depths of their projects in a very like held way, and it's not very social media-ish.
So beautiful. I love that offering, and thank you so much for sharing. It's been really an honor to have you on to hear your magical way of telling stories. And I know that so many women are going to receive such beautiful medicine from this. So yeah, just thank you from the bottom of my heart, Meghan. It's been really wonderful.
Thank you so much, Natalie. Thank you for holding the space and for the work that you're doing, and for allowing me to come at my story in such a interesting way, which clearly is your own gift.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for tuning in to the wisdom of the womb today. It's truly an honor to bring these stories forward, and it would mean so much to me if you'd rate and review this podcast so that it can reach even more women. If you're looking for deeper support, you can find the link to book a one-on-one virtual session in the show notes. See you next week.